Betty White was more than America's sweetheart. She was a woman of resilience and quiet strength. She defied Hollywood norms, challenged racial barriers, and faced personal tragedies with grace. But a pivotal chapter in her life remained largely untold, until now. In this video, we're going beyond the Golden Girls and uncovering the difficult truths that made Betty the icon we know and love. Difficult childhood. In the heart of Oak Park, Illinois, a little girl named Betty Marion White entered the world on January 17, 1922. Despite what some might think, Betty wasn't a nickname. It was her real legal name. She was the only child of her parents, Christine and Horace White. Her dad worked for a lighting company, and her family had a mix of backgrounds: Greek, Danish, English, and even some Welsh. When Betty was just a year old, her family packed up and moved to sunny California, first to Alhambra and then to Los Angeles. This was during the Great Depression, so times were tough. Betty's dad, a resourceful man, built crystal radios and traded them for other stuff to help make ends meet. Sometimes he even traded radios for dogs. Growing up in Beverly Hills, Betty went to Horace Mann Elementary School and Beverly Hills High School. She loved spending time outdoors and dreamed of becoming a forest ranger. But back then, women weren't allowed to do that job. Instead, Betty discovered a love for performing. She wrote and starred in a play for her high school graduation and realized she was pretty good at it. Inspired by famous singers Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy, she set her sights on becoming an actress. It was the start of a journey that would lead her to become a beloved icon in the entertainment industry. Just a month after finishing high school, Betty's adventurous spirit led her to a unique opportunity. She and a friend sang songs from The Merry Widow on an experimental TV show. Remember, this was back in 1939, when television was still a brand new thing. Betty wasn't just a singer, though. She also worked as a model, and her very first acting job was at the Bliss Hayden Little Theater. But then World War II started, and everything changed. Betty, always eager to help, volunteered for the American Women's Voluntary Services. Her job was to drive a big truck filled with supplies for the soldiers up to the Hollywood Hills. She also helped put on shows for the troops before they went off to fight. Looking back on those times, Betty said it was a strange and confusing period. The war turned the world upside down, but she did her part to support the troops and bring a little joy to their lives. Early success. With the war over, Betty was eager to get back to acting. She went to all the movie studios, hoping to land a role, but they all turned her down. They said she wasn't photogenic enough, meaning she didn't look good on camera. But Betty didn't give up. If movies weren't an option, she'd try radio instead. She started getting small jobs on the radio, reading commercials, playing little parts, and even making crowd noises in the background. It wasn't glamorous, and she only made about $5 per show, but she was determined to make it work. Betty was a hard worker, always willing to try anything. She even sang on a radio show for free, just for the experience. She appeared on popular shows like Blondie, The Great Gildersleeve, and This Is Your FBI. Then, in 1949, Betty made the jump to television. She co-hosted a live variety show called Hollywood on Television with Al Jarvis. This was a big deal because it was one of the first daily live TV shows in Los Angeles. Betty was a natural on camera, and her bubbly personality quickly won over viewers. In 1952, Al Jarvis left the show, and Betty was suddenly the sole host of Hollywood on Television. Imagine that. A young woman hosting a live TV show for 5.5 hours a day, 6 days a week, and she did it for 4 years straight. Betty was fearless, always ready with a joke or a song. She even sang a couple of songs during every show, showcasing her versatility as a performer. Her talent and hard work didn't go unnoticed. In 1951, Betty was nominated for her first Emmy Award as Best Actress on Television. She was up against some big names like Judith Anderson, Helen Hayes, and Imogene Coca. Even though she didn't win, it was a huge honor for Betty to be recognized for her talent so early in her career. This was a time when the Emmy Awards were different. The award was for an actress's overall work, not for a specific show. But still, it showed that Betty was making a name for herself in the new world of television. She was a pioneer, a woman paving the way for others in the entertainment industry. The Betty White Show. Betty's star was rising, and from 1952 to 1954, she got her own show called The Betty White Show. It was a daily talk and variety show where she could chat with guests and show off her singing and comedic chops. This time, she was the boss, producing the show and even hiring a female director, which was pretty rare back then. Betty always believed in giving everyone a chance, so she hired a talented African-American tap dancer named Arthur Duncan to be a regular on her show. This was a big deal because it was the first time a black performer had a regular spot on a national variety show. But not everyone was happy about it. Some TV stations in the South, where racial segregation was still a big problem, threatened to boycott the show if Arthur Duncan wasn't fired. Betty wouldn't stand for that. She told them, "I'm sorry, live with it," and even gave Arthur more time on the show. At first, The Betty White Show was a hit, but it kept getting moved to different time slots, and the ratings started to drop. Sadly, by the end of 1954, the show was quietly canceled. But even though it didn't last, Betty had made history by standing up for what she believed in and giving a talented performer a chance to shine. Rise to stardom. In 1952, the same year she started hosting Hollywood on television, Betty teamed up with some friends to create her own production company called Bandy Productions. They took funny characters from her show and turned them into a brand new sitcom called Life with Elizabeth. This show was a big deal for Betty. She played the lead role of Elizabeth, a married woman who always seemed to get into silly situations. The show was a hit, and Betty even won a Los Angeles Emmy Award for her performance. It was also unusual for the time because Betty, a young woman of 28, had full control over the show. She made the decisions both on and off camera, even though she still lived with her parents. Betty said the show wasn't about being fancy or trendy. It was about real life. Many of the funny stories were based on things that actually happened to her co-star Del Moore, or the writers. It was a comedy that people could relate to, but Betty didn't stop there. She was also a star in TV commercials that aired live in Los Angeles. One of her most famous ads was for Dr. Ross dog food, which she performed with her signature charm. She even made a guest appearance on the popular show The Millionaire, playing a diner owner who suddenly receives $1 million. Betty's career was taking off, and she was becoming a household name. After Life with Elizabeth ended, Betty landed a new role as Vicki Angel on the ABC sitcom Date with the Angels. The show was supposed to be about Vicki's daydreams and fantasies, a bit like the play Dreamgirl. But the show's sponsor didn't like the fantasy parts and wanted them gone. This made Betty unhappy. She later said it was the only time she ever wanted to quit a show. The network wouldn't let her out of her contract, so she had to keep doing the show for 13 more weeks. Instead of trying to change the sitcom, Betty went back to what she knew best, hosting her own talk and variety show. So, The Betty White Show was back on the air. This new version of the show filled the rest of the time she owed ABC. Sadly, the sitcom Date with the Angels wasn't a hit with viewers or critics. But Betty's fans loved seeing her back in her element on her own show, proving that she could always find a way to bounce back. While Date with the Angels wasn't a great experience overall, it did bring something special into Betty's life, a friendship with Lucille Ball, the iconic star of I Love Lucy. Both shows were filmed at the same studio, so Betty and Lucille would often run into each other. They hit it off right away, bonding over their shared experience as women making it big in the male-dominated world of television. They became close friends, supporting each other through thick and thin. They talked about everything from divorces and health problems to losing loved ones. They even had a playful rivalry on game shows, often competing against each other. But their friendship was about more than just fun and games. They both understood the challenges of being successful women in a tough industry, and they leaned on each other for advice and encouragement. This friendship would last for years, proving that sometimes even a not-so-great show can lead to something truly wonderful. In July 1959, Betty added another feather to her cap, her professional stage debut. She starred in a play called Third Best Sport in Pennsylvania. This was a new challenge for Betty, showing her versatility as a performer and her willingness to try new things. By the 1960s, Betty White was a familiar face on television. She was a regular guest on popular game shows and talk shows, including The Tonight Show, with both Jack Paar and later Johnny Carson. She was especially fond of the game show Password, where she appeared as a celebrity guest many times between 1961 and 1975. It was on the set of Password that she met Alan Ludden, the show's host. She continued to appear on various versions of Password, including Password Plus, Super Password, and $1 Million Password. But Betty's game show appearances didn't stop there. She was a frequent guest on other popular shows like What's My Line, To Tell the Truth, I've Got a Secret, Match Game, and Pyramid. She was a natural at these games, always quick with a witty response and a charming smile. Betty's talent wasn't limited to television. In 1962, she made her big screen debut in the movie Advise and Consent, playing a fictional senator. Years later, a talk show host and historian pointed out how impressive it was that Betty was playing a strong female role like that back in the early 60s. In 1963, Betty took on a new challenge, performing in a live theater production of The King and I. She played the lead role of Anna Leonowens, a British schoolteacher who travels to Siam, now Thailand, to teach the king's children. It was a different kind of performance for Betty, but she proved once again that she could excel in any role she took on. Betty's popularity continued to grow, and in the 1960s, she was offered a big opportunity to be an anchor on the popular morning show Today. This was a major deal, but it meant moving to New York City, where the show was filmed. Betty loved California and didn't want to leave, so she turned it down. The job eventually went to Barbara Walters, who became a famous news anchor. Even without Today, Betty was still a busy bee. For 19 years, she was the friendly face of the Rose Parade, hosting the annual event on NBC, alongside Roy Neal and later Lorne Greene. She also became a regular guest on late-night talk shows like The Tonight Show with Jack Paar, and she continued to appear on various game shows. She was everywhere, always charming viewers with her wit and warmth. The established star. In 1973, Betty landed a role on the hit show The Mary Tyler Moore Show. She played Sue Ann Nivens, a character known for being man-hungry. It was a fun role for Betty, but she also thought the character was a bit icky sweet. She felt Sue Ann was the perfect example of how women were supposed to act back then, all sugary and passive, which was something Betty always made fun of in her own way. The show's producers loved Betty's performance so much that they made Sue Ann a regular character. This happened after another actress, Valerie Harper, left the show. One of the funniest things about Sue Ann was how different she was off camera. On her TV show, The Happy Homemaker, she was all smiles and sweetness, but in real life, she was sassy and cynical. It was a hilarious contrast. Betty's role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show was a huge success. She won 2 Emmy Awards in a row for playing Sue Ann in 1975 and 1976. But what's interesting is that the show's creators almost didn't hire her because they were worried about her friendship with Mary Tyler Moore. They thought it would be awkward if Betty wasn't right for the part. But they were wrong. Betty and Mary were already best friends, and their friendship only grew stronger because of the show. They even shared a double date with their husbands, Grant Tinker and Alan Ludden. It turns out that friendship and comedy can go hand in hand after all. In 1975, NBC made a surprising decision to replace Betty as the hostess of the Tournament of Roses parade. They felt she was too closely associated with The Mary Tyler Moore Show on CBS. Betty admitted it was tough watching someone else take over her beloved parade, but she didn't let it get her down. Instead, she jumped ship to CBS and became the hostess of their Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade for the next 10 years. After The Mary Tyler Moore Show ended in 1977, CBS offered Betty her very own sitcom, also called The Betty White Show. This was her fourth sitcom, and she co-starred with John Hillerman and Georgia Engel. Unfortunately, the show struggled against the popular Monday Night Football and was canceled after one season. Despite the setback, Betty kept busy. She made frequent appearances on The Carol Burnett Show and The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, bringing her comedic talent to their sketches. She also started acting in TV movies and miniseries like With This Ring and The Best Place to Be. In 1983, Betty made history again, becoming the first woman to win a Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Game Show Host. She won it for her work on the NBC show Just Men. Because of all the game shows she hosted and appeared on, she earned the nickname First Lady of Game Shows. Betty's career was a whirlwind of different roles and opportunities, but one thing remained constant: her love for entertaining and making people laugh. She was a true trailblazer for women in television, proving that she could do it all with grace, humor, and a whole lot of talent. In 1985, Betty's career hit the jackpot with a show that would become a television legend, The Golden Girls. This sitcom followed the lives of four older women living together in Miami, Florida. Betty played the lovable and naive Rose Nyland, a woman from St. Olaf, Minnesota, who always had a funny story to tell. The show was an instant hit, with viewers falling in love with Betty, B. Arthur, Estelle Getty, and Rue McClanahan. The Golden Girls ran for 7 seasons, and Betty won an Emmy Award for the very first season. In fact, she was nominated for an Emmy every year the show was on air. Interestingly, Betty had worked with Rue McClanahan before on a show called Mama's Family. But The Golden Girls was their biggest success together, creating a bond that lasted for years. However, not everything was sunshine and roses behind the scenes. Betty had a somewhat difficult relationship with her co-star, B. Arthur. They weren't always on the best of terms, both on and off set. Betty's positive attitude sometimes annoyed B, who could be a bit grumpy. Despite this, the show's magic was undeniable, and their on-screen chemistry entertained millions of viewers. The Golden Girls became more than just a sitcom. It became a cultural phenomenon. It tackled important issues like aging, friendship, and family with humor and heart. Betty's portrayal of Rose, the sweet and sometimes silly friend, solidified her place as a comedy legend. In 2009, Betty lost her beloved husband, Alan Ludden. It was a heartbreaking time, and she said, "I knew it would hurt. I just didn't know it would hurt this much." Even though she and B. Arthur sometimes clashed, Betty always valued her time on The Golden Girls and had deep respect for her co-stars and the show's success. Interestingly, Betty wasn't originally supposed to play Rose. She was first offered the role of Blanche, the flirty Southern belle, while Rue McClanahan was supposed to play Rose. But the director suggested they switch roles, thinking it would be fun for them to try something new. Betty was worried at first, wondering if she could play the naive Rose, but the director explained that Rose wasn't just naive, she was terminally naive. Betty joked that if you told Rose you were so hungry you could eat a horse, she'd call the Animal Protection Society. Sadly, The Golden Girls ended in 1992 when B. Arthur decided to leave the show. But Betty, Rue, and Estelle Getty weren't ready to say goodbye to their characters. They brought Rose, Blanche, and Sophia back for a new sitcom called The Golden Palace. Unfortunately, the new show didn't last long, only airing for one season. But Betty wasn't done playing Rose just yet. She made special guest appearances on other NBC shows like Empty Nest and Nurses, bringing a little bit of Golden Girls magic to those shows as well. It was clear that Betty and her fans weren't quite ready to let go of the beloved Rose Nyland. Beyond the Golden Girls. After The Golden Palace ended, Betty wasn't slowing down. She popped up on all sorts of shows like Suddenly Susan, The Practice, and Yes Dear, earning herself even more Emmy nominations. In 1996, she even won an Emmy for her hilarious guest appearance on The John Larroquette Show, where she played a diva-like version of herself trying to write her memoir. Betty wasn't just on TV, though. She also starred in movies like Lake Placid and Bringing Down the House, showing her comedic range on the big screen. In 2006, she joined the soap opera The Bold and the Beautiful, playing the long-lost mother of the show's main character. She also had a recurring role on the legal drama Boston Legal as a sneaky gossip monger. It was a role she first played on The Practice, proving that she could play a villain just as well as a sweetheart. Betty even returned to her game show roots, appearing on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson, and a new version of Password called $1 Million Password. In 2008, she joined Oprah for a reunion special of The Mary Tyler Moore Show, bringing back all the memories of that beloved sitcom. Betty also used her fame to help animals. She appeared in commercials for PetMed Express, sharing her passion for animal welfare. But perhaps one of Betty's most memorable roles came in 2009 when she starred in the romantic comedy The Proposal, alongside Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds. She played Ryan Reynolds' sassy grandmother, stealing scenes with her hilarious one-liners and comedic timing. The movie was a big hit, proving that Betty's charm and humor could reach audiences of all ages. In the same year, Betty starred in a Super Bowl commercial for Snickers candy bar. The ad became a fan favorite, winning the top spot on the Super Bowl ad meter. Betty's career was on fire, showing that she was still a force to be reckoned with even as she entered her 80s. After that Super Bowl commercial, Betty's career went into overdrive. A bunch of fans started a campaign on Facebook to get her to host Saturday Night Live. It caught on like wildfire, and NBC actually listened. In May 2010, at the age of 88, Betty became the oldest person to ever host SNL. She opened the show with a hilarious monologue, thanking Facebook but also joking that it sounded like a waste of time. Everyone loved her performance, and she even won another Emmy Award for it. But Betty wasn't done yet. That same year, she landed a starring role on a new sitcom called Hot in Cleveland. She played Elka Ostrovsky, the caretaker of a house shared by 3 women who moved from Los Angeles to Cleveland. Betty was originally only supposed to be in the first episode, but she was so funny and charming that they asked her to stay for the entire series. The show was a huge success, and it ran for 6 seasons. Betty was nominated for another Emmy for her role, showing that she was still at the top of her game even in her 80s. It seemed like everyone loved Betty White, and she was having a major career resurgence. Betty's success didn't stop there. In 2011, she starred in The Lost Valentine, a heartwarming movie on the Hallmark Channel. It was a big hit, getting the highest ratings for a Hallmark movie in 4 years, and even winning the primetime slot on the night it aired. Betty also kept things fun and fresh by hosting and producing a show called Betty White's Off Their Rockers from 2012 to 2014. This show was all about seniors pranking younger people, and it earned Betty 3 more Emmy nominations. But Betty's talents weren't limited to the screen. She also had a 2011 calendar featuring photos of her throughout her career and with her beloved animals. She even launched a clothing line with her face on the shirts, with all the money going to help animal charities. In 2012, Betty won her first Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Recording for her best-selling book, If You Ask Me. She also received the UCLA Jack Benny Award for Comedy, a big honor for her contributions to comedy on television. And to top it off, she was roasted by the New York Friars Club, proving she could take a joke as well as she could tell one. To celebrate her 90th birthday, NBC threw a special party for Betty, with appearances from lots of famous people she had worked with over the years. Even President Barack Obama sent a special message. NBC loved celebrating Betty so much that they did it again for her 91st birthday, this time with former President Bill Clinton joining in on the fun. Personal life. During World War II, while Betty was volunteering, she met a dashing Air Force pilot named Dick Barker. They got married after the war and moved to his chicken farm in Ohio. Betty, used to the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles, wasn't cut out for farm life. They divorced within a year, and Betty headed back to California. In 1947, Betty tried marriage again, this time with a Hollywood talent agent named Lane Allen. But they had different dreams for the future. Lane wanted to start a family, while Betty was focused on her career. After 2 years, they also divorced. But then, in 1961, Betty met the love of her life, Alan Ludden. They met when she was a guest on his game show, Password, and it was love at first sight. Betty quickly fell for Alan Ludden's enthusiasm and zest for life. He was interested in everything and always eager to learn new things. It was a refreshing change for Betty, especially since Alan was dealing with the loss of his wife when they first met. Alan had 3 children who had lost their mother, and Betty immediately embraced them, forming a close bond with the whole family. Their connection was so strong that Alan proposed to Betty within weeks of meeting her. Betty, still hesitant about marriage after 2 divorces, wasn't ready to say yes, but Alan was persistent. When she refused a diamond ring, he even wore it on a chain around his neck. He wouldn't give up on their love. Finally, in 1963, Alan won her over with a sweet gesture. He sent her a white stuffed bunny with earrings hidden in its ears. Betty couldn't resist his charm any longer and said yes. She later admitted that she wished they had gotten married sooner, saying, "I wasted all that time we could have been together." Even though they were already friends, adjusting to married life wasn't always easy. Betty missed her home in California, but their love for each other made it work. They had a simple but joyful life together, filled with barbecues, dancing to records, and lots of laughter. Betty was incredibly happy with Alan. She once told Johnny Carson on his show that she had never been happier in her life. But their happiness was cut short when Alan was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer. It was a devastating blow. Despite the pain, Betty remained strong for her husband. She would rehearse for her shows and then rush to the hospital to spend time with him. Alan's health declined, and he fell into a coma. Sadly, just 2 months shy of their 18th wedding anniversary, he passed away, leaving Betty heartbroken. Even though Alan was gone, Betty never forgot her love for him. She never remarried, often joking that her first 2 marriages were just rehearsals for the real thing. She would say, "If you've had the best, who needs the rest?" Betty and Alan didn't have children together, but Betty never regretted that decision. She was focused on her career and felt she couldn't give both motherhood and her work the attention they deserved. But even years after Alan's death, Betty still kept a photo of him by her bed. Every morning she would blow him a kiss, and every night she would blow another one up to the sky. Their love was so strong that she felt like they were still on their honeymoon, even though they had been married for 18 years. Betty dated other people after Alan passed away, but she never found anyone who could compare. When she passed away in 2021, her close friend and agent said that her love for Alan never faded. She wasn't afraid of dying because she believed she would be reunited with him. In fact, her last word was reportedly, "Alan," a touching reminder of the deep love they shared. Betty was just a few weeks shy of her 100th birthday when she passed, and she always attributed her long and happy life to her positive outlook. She said she inherited her optimism from her mother And that's what helped her always find the good in every situation. This joyful spirit also extended to her hobbies. Betty loved playing poker with her friends and wasn't shy about enjoying a vodka cocktail. She knew how to have fun and make the most of life. But perhaps Betty's biggest passion was her love for animals. She often talked about her pets with so much love and believed in treating animals with kindness and respect. Betty White's love for animals went far beyond cuddles and playtime. She was a serious advocate for their well-being. For over 40 years, she was a trustee of the Greater Los Angeles Zoo Association, using her fame to raise money and awareness for animal conservation and welfare. She was always involved in events and projects at the Los Angeles Zoo, going above and beyond to support their work. Betty also worked with other animal organizations like the Morris Animal Foundation and the African Wildlife Foundation. She donated money and time to help animals, not just in the United States, but all over the world. She even hosted a show called Pet Set, where she talked about famous people's pets and other animal-related topics.